Hello, everyone. It's a delight to be here and to welcome you all to today's event. As Lily says, I'm an independent curator and writer based in Essex in the southeast of England. And I'm really pleased to welcome you to our fourth and final assembly event in which we pose the question, is the future of public art online? By way of introduction, I am a middle-aged white woman with short grey hair, glasses, and an unruly pile of books behind me. I've been working with Public Art Network and UP projects on this programme of talks over the last 6 months. And for those of you who don't know about it, the Public Art Network is a relatively new entity developed by a group of curators working across the UK. And our aim is to extend opportunities for conversation, collaboration, professional development, and knowledge exchange amongst curators, artists, and producers. And this is our first public programme. Assembly is a series of 4 free talks that explore issues and good practice in the expanded field of public art. And the programme invites you, the public art community, to consider the role public art can play in raising awareness and affecting change on issues around diversity, community cohesion, and the digital realm as a public space. And across these 4 events, we've put together, I think, a really fantastic group of curators and artists and practitioners who've explored the following questions. Who has agency? What is collaboration? What is the role of curators in socially engaged practice? And the topic for today's event is the future of public art online. The speakers at each event have also been invited to contribute a case study, which will be published on our website and shared with all attendees via email. So do look out for those in your inbox in the weeks ahead. We're really delighted with the reception of these talks, particularly the international reach and the incredibly useful and pertinent range of issues that every one of our speakers has raised, as well as members of the audience. And if you haven't been able to attend previous talks, I really recommend you search them out on UP Project's YouTube page. And I'll be bringing together all of the issues that have been raised in the programme in a piece of writing over the coming months. So on to today's discussion around digital spaces and public art, which I should say is also informing UP Project's current investigation into the online realm as a site for public art through its This is Public Space programme. We've spent the last year interacting with the world through our screens. Is this the point at which public art becomes something that is primarily experienced through the digital world rather than the physical world? Has the non-hierarchical, expansive world of the internet overtaken the increasingly privatised and co-opted world of the public realm? Can public art commissioning build on this expanded form of public space? We've invited Siddharth Khajuria, senior producer at the Barbican Centre in London, to chair today's event. I'm delighted to welcome you, Sid, and help us consider these really meaty issues. Before I hand over, I should add that the event will address specific topics that may not be familiar to everyone. And we've added definitions of blockchain, DAO, NFT, and SDGs on UP Project's event page. And I think Lily's put a link in the chat box. And we've also asked speakers to spell out what these terms mean during the presentation. And as Lily said at the beginning, if you have any feedback on this event, there'll be an opportunity for you to voice this in the questionnaire available at the end. Sid, over to you.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks everyone for joining from wherever you're joining from as well. Jess, I love hearing you talk about the genesis of the program. I feel like those 4 questions you've alighted on, they're kind of almost too resonant for comfort in the context of some of the conversations I found myself in over the last year, and I imagine that's true for a lot of the people here. Anyway, I'm Siddharth Khajuria. I'm an Indian man with short-ish black hair, wearing a patterned red and brown shirt, and my pronouns are he and him. I'm also a cultural programmer and producer, and currently manage a public programme of socially focused exhibitions, events and research projects at the Barbican, which is, as Jess said, in London. I'm not going to talk for too long because I'm so excited, and I've just had a glimpse of some of the things that they're thinking about, to be joined by Soledad Gutiérrez and Penny Rafferty. But I am just going to try and frame the conversation and pick up on a couple of the threads that Jess outlined. I've been chatting to the team up over the last couple of weeks about this event in particular to get a sense of the kind of conversation they and Jess were hoping to convene. And through that dialogue, something that struck me was the extent to which they really think about what the public in public art means. And chatting to them, it feels like they think about it in two ways. There's one, which is the public as a type of space, a shared open space. But secondly, also as a people, as groups of communities who participate in the creation and experience of cultural work. And in this event, we're going to focus on the latter of those two and really get into the question of whether it's possible, and if it is, how we talk about public art on the internet. Who are some of these communities? How are they constituted? And at its heart, I think the conversation today is a space to explore what alternative structures and framings for artistic practice, creative collaboration, and public engagement the digital space allows. And I think taking a step back, I imagine sort of there are many of us here who aren't solely concerned with the construction of work or the co-creation of work for the digital space. What kind of alternative organizational structures might the digital space allow us to conceive of in the in inverted commas real world? And I think as public art commissioners, I know the likes of UP are always and rightly asked about the benefit and the impact of their work, how a specific project will be useful to either a specific public realm or specific communities. With this event, we're trying to explore how some of these ideas around community and social benefit play out online, and how social and political agendas are advanced, or in some cases compromised, when embracing any number of online technologies. Right, I'm going to wrap up there. But just before I hand over to Penny and Soledad, I just wanted to give you a sense of how we're going to structure the event today. We're going to start with a couple of short talks, 10 minutes from Penny, and then Penny's going to hand straight over to Soledad, and 10 minutes from Soledad. After that, the three of us are going to have a conversation. And I'll make sure we've got at least 10, maybe 15 minutes at the end for questions. And you'll notice the Q&A. If you ask questions in there, please keep doing so through the conversation. I'll flag it again when we start talking, but I'll make sure we've got time at the end to get into those. Okay. I daren't try and distill anyone, well, I'll just struggle to distill people as interesting as this, but or anyone, into a sentence or two. But I'm going to hand over to Penny Rafferty, ask her to introduce herself and talk to us for 10 minutes or so about her work.
Thank you, Sid. And thank you all for attending. I'm Penny Rafferty. I'm a white woman with freckles, green eyes, auburn hair, and I'm sitting in front of a rather abstract painting by Jonas Schullebeck. And I'm here today to talk about Black Swan, which I'm just one part of. The other members and conspirators is Callum Burden, Laura Lottie, and in the past have been Maureen Dietrich, Catherine, and Paul Seidler and Max Hampshire. And so I'm just going to begin by speaking a little bit about what is Black Swan. Black Swan started in 2017 and was actually came out of many different people asking how can we make things better in Berlin. And this was particularly about the issues of gentrification and how do we look after our art scene from the bottom up. And over these various different conversations and panels and discussions, both private and public, it seemed that one key issue was always kind of rooted in these problems. And that was something that Kate Brown termed as grooming. Grooming actually is when, in this context, when larger galleries, blue chip galleries, institutions, and so forth, tend to often cherry pick off the top of smaller institutions and project spaces and artist-led projects and groups and collectives that have had little to no support from the wider schema of things, but have pretty much allowed most artists, writers, curators to really kind of cut their teeth in the making and also the progressions of their careers. And so we tried to think about how to level the playing field in a way, or at least how to create systems that could envisage a sort of payback schema. And this was where Black Swan came into things. So Black Swan is a new decentralized approach to kind of traditional art world templates for making. It really favors artist-led peer-to-peer funding and community organizing to place resources really into the hands of the users rather than the gatekeepers of the arts. Black Swan was originally designed as an experiment to rethink the mechanisms that produced the current and next generation of creative practitioners. It was actually originally a paper prototype essay that then so many people around me actually believed could work that it then took on a physical form. It has proposed a collaborational institutional formation to allow for the redefinition of what art can be on a local level, but also aims to become a translocal, mutable source for thinking about resources differently across the art world. We're often told there's no other way in culture, that resources are limited and that opportunities should be taken at all costs. Well, Black Swan actually refuses this notion, and we were inspired to deny this by a single observation of a black swan in the 17th century, which literally on first sight invalidated the fact that only white swans exist. In this framework, we dare to think differently about alternatives, and by deploying advanced technologies and organizational forms to enable a more interdependent art world that is held together by radical friendships over and above profits. So, the original idea of Black Swan was a kind of decentralized, critical, autonomous organization, which means that users are in charge of their assets and resources, which they acquire from silent stakeholders. I'll come on to the silent stakeholders in a second. But these silent stakeholders proffer resources to the decentralized autonomous organization, DAO, in order for them to be able to be disseminated to the group of users. The DAO is located online. However, the dissemination and art objects can be produced on and offline. Our group of users are local to Berlin cultural workers right now, and they often have quite radical practices that broker new space for the arts, a new space of thinking about art. And typically they're also from potentially marginalized voices in the art realm, because of course Black Swan is also situated in an essentially biased system, whether that be classes, race, or gender-based. And so these are the people that we particularly wanted to work with at the beginning, or at least the genesis of working with this DAO. The accesses can vary from monetary ones to also fundamental resources. So we've also wanted to look at the environmental costs to which can affect an art community. Katrin Maya was one of the people who was very heavily involved at the beginning of this project, was actually working in a large institution and spoke about how much resources were thrown out at the end of each show. And so we got speaking with these institutions, and they said, well, actually, if there was a way where we didn't have to throw them out and we could actually offer them to the community and they would be picked up, used in different projects, then this was a much better solution. And so there's lots of different sort of elements to this funding model that are not purely fiat currency, also unused space, studio residencies, etc., etc. And so at this point, you may be wondering who these angelic stakeholders are. Well, They are, in a sense, blue chip galleries, institutions, collections, and anyone who thinks it's important to support the emerging scene, rather than letting it starve in hope of one day being able to gorge itself if it reaches the banqueted plateau. In a sense, how we've created it, these stakeholders pledge support to Black Swan, and they can decide freely how much they wish to support in each pledge, which goes over a year. And each resource is given a kind of credit numeration, which we then offer the silent stakeholders a certificate of support, which is also a visible asset of their political and cultural opinions towards the emerging local scene. The silent stakeholders' return on this support is actually a long-term investment. If the emerging art scene has support, it will inevitably produce better, more radical, more interesting artists and thinkers, which will cement Berlin's position in the contemporary art world, and in turn the silent stakeholders will turn profitable numbers on its cultural capital. The way we typically have been working is working through working groups, which then run for a number of weeks or shorter, long or short hackathon styles, and we create reports after this, and then from those reports we'll create technological tools. One such one is Signet, which is a quadratic voting application that actually works on a lunar cycle, because inside Black Swan we actually need to use decision creating mechanisms. And so our DAO uses quadratic voting for decision making. Quadratic voting means that each user has multiple votes that can allocate to various positions or abstain from their voting until the next round without omitting this vote. This offers collective decisions to be made without the tyranny of the majority, and also allows people to get to know each other's projects. So in essence, you have, let's say, 100 votes and you can put them on different projects. And we're also decided to use the lunar cycles because in a way we wanted to create alternative methods of distributing funding that are more outside of the schematic and more into the physical realm. I just want to finish up by quickly saying that what's really, really important for us in relation to using decentralized autonomous organizations and these technologies, and hopefully adding to this conversation today, is that it's super important for art to be part of these technological conversations. The art world provides one of the strongest societal and social test beds for the digital native generation. Artists also bring value to technological development of these spaces. Technology, in a sense, should be about aiding our social evolution rather than the human being being modeled or molded to technology. I also really believe that these types of engagement with more democratic forms of decision-making and resource distribution will open up both artistic and technological development on funding, prioritization, decision-making, and really deep down, using decentralized autonomous organizations in the art world will demonstrate the importance of the user's role in shaping their own technological tools for themselves as a counterbalance to systems designed from the center that may not have their best interests at heart. I hope that made sense. 10 minutes is very quick to talk about these things.
Thanks, Penny. It did, and also we've got time to unpack so many of the things you've talked about there, but I'm going to very swiftly hand over to Soledad before we get into a conversation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Soledad Gutiérrez, and I'm a white woman, high kind of long bob, dark hair. I refer to the pronoun of she, her, and I'm based in Madrid. So even though I'm going to talk to you about the digital space that it's called Stage, and it's a digital platform we have created throughout the last year in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm very much rooted, and we are very much working from the place of Madrid. So basically, and to start with the project, if that's okay, and how we have been working, it responds, and it's really interesting. Thank you, Penny, and thank you, Sid, for the introduction. Thank you, Jess, and the whole team, because I think many of the questions that Penny has raised are also part of the conversations coming from a totally different perspective and a totally different ground. Stage, the project I'm presenting, and I'm going to share the screen with you. So we're going to go to the page for a second, and then maybe I return to my face. It's an online production platform driven by the desire for change, and it was initiated by TVA21. TVA21 is a private foundation that was created by Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza 20 years ago, a foundation that has been working with artists and with the aim on commissioning and giving artists the possibility to unfold those ideas, those projects that were not possible to unfold within the art market, kind of facilitating making dreams true. When the pandemic started, suddenly we found ourselves that we had like few projects, performance, conversations, commissions committed to the artists, and there was no space anymore for those pieces to be shown or those performances to happen. And also we suddenly felt the urgency of supporting the cultural life and supporting projects by artists. So we decided to create this platform, or to create, when we started this conversation, and this I think links quite a bit with Penny, we didn't know what to do or how to do it. We just wanted to support people. It was like, there were like kind of wild conversations, like let's throw out money to the cultural sector, whatever. But then we decided like, okay, let's work on commissioning that's what TVA21 has been doing for the last 20 years, but let's change the way of operating. Let's provide seed funding to the artists to produce projects that they are not going to be part of the collection. They are just going to be belong to the artist. And let's go a step further. Let's create this space for presenting the projects, that they can speak to a community, that they can create a community itself, and they help us to relate or to sense different realities throughout the globe. We were in lockdown, we were isolated, and we were learning that we were able to communicate and that we were able to create a space to include and to connect with different people. So we reach out to a network of independent organizations like Jose Roca, Flora in Colombia, Puja Sud in New Delhi, Coach Artist in Residency, Utemata Bauer in the University of Singapore, the Contemporary Art Center. And we asked them, like, why don't we build a network of institutions, and through this network we connect with artists that can bring them their realities and that can help us to sense what are the urgencies of our time by producing a piece that doesn't have to be finished, or that produce a material that could be the beginning of a project, could be the closing edition of a project, like could be a conference, like a lecture performance that represents a midterm, and how we can bring that artistic production into the wider picture. We were very much interested on this public potential of the technology, of the internet, of being here together, of being coming from different places in the world, coming from different, and getting together in this digital space. So this idea that Sid has mentioned before, the idea of the public space as a space, but also how we can connect with those publics. So we decided that we didn't want just to broadcast, that we wanted to open a two-side relationship with the artists and with, in the beginning, with their communities, because that's what we had. So therefore, we invited them to produce a series of materials that are like different podcasts, for example. Then we invited them to share the research cluster, or share the research process that has accompanied the production of that piece with a research cluster. Also, we invite them, there is a conversation between the producer, the curator, and the artist, and also something that we thought it was really important, a call to action. A call to action that basically invites all the people that visit the space, that the digital space, that sees the work or listens to the work or reads the work, because there are like many different ways of connecting with the pieces, and there are different formats. They go from a video game or a virtual reality presentation that runs on Twitch and it's connected to the platform, to a digital publication, to a video, like to connect with a wider topic and with the communities that support that. So for example, there is a very specific case, that's Patricia Dominguez, that she was working from Chile, that she was dealing with an organization that supports, that fights for the rights to the water of the people in certain areas of Chile, because it's one of the countries that has already privatized the water. Then she asked to support that organization to give water to the people around, which in COVID became a great disaster, because if you have to wash your hands and you don't have access to the water, then hygienization is not possible. So we try to create that engagement with the communities. We sustain those relationships and we carry on the conversations with them in different formats and ways, but also we wanted to invite people that visit the space to engage with these projects, with these situations, and with these concerns that the artists were raising. And one of the things that we acknowledge is that we sometimes, as an institution, as a private foundation, we have a certain kind of privileges. So we also wanted to inform and to influence on the political agendas. That's a huge ambition, because we acknowledge that's something we all want to do, and sometimes we don't know how. So one of the things we try to do is to connect, and I'm going to share the screen because sometimes that's more complicated in terms of so we connect. This is, for example, one of the last pieces we have presented. It's a collaboration with Escala One, and it's a piece that deals with it's a very touching story, a moving story of Aboud Farid, that he is a conservator of one of the main museums in Syria, and he preserves the mosaics. So this piece brings us to the daily survival rituals of many people living under conflict, and what we have done is connected with the SDGs. For those who don't know, the SDGs is the Sustainable Development Goals that are created by the UN for the 2030 agenda. And what they want to do is to create a lead for politicians, policymakers, for people that are connected with the structures of policy creating, to create like frameworks for the different projects so they can understand how this connects to that. What we were trying to create here is a communication tool, is a bridge between policy making and art, between changing in the level, in a structural level, and art. And that's something that we have been really dealing with throughout the stage, how we can create the bridges with different communities in different levels in terms of from the policymakers to the grassroots activists in different countries, from the users of the platform through the people that needs that help, and how we can throughout that sustain a community that stays in the long run and bears with us, and through the lenses of art or through the creative project of art we can transform and challenge a better world. And that's something that we started like an urgency, a response to COVID, and now that we want to sustain in time, because we see that there is many potential to produce and to explore still. And I think my 10 minutes are done. I very much hope we can carry on the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Soledad. Yes, we can continue the conversation too, because that's what, yeah, I'm trying to do that now. Thank you. I'm gonna dive in with a handful of questions. But I'm just going to remind everyone listening, watching, reading that please, if you do have a question, type it into the Q&A. And also, if someone else has asked a question, and I can see this happening already, if someone's asked a question that you're keen on, do vote for it, because it'll give me a sense of where the interest lies in the room. But I'm going to dive in to start with. And actually, I'll start. This is a question for both of you, but to you first, Penny. There's a thread running through both these presentations about community, but I sense that it's conceived of differently by each of you. So Penny, how do you conceive of community in the context of the work that you've been doing with Black Swan?
I mean, in a sense, there's many communities that are actually kind of active around Black Swan. The first one being in 2017, like there's actually quite fragmented community that really required this research to be done, or like a proposition to come into like the forefront of the discussion. So I would say, like, in a sense, like Black Swan actually emerged out of a community need, rather than, which is a bit different to, I think, most ways of understanding technology, which is typically from like inspiration of like what mechanism could be created, and then like you decide if it meets a need or not. So I would say that first of all, there was this kind of fragmentation of the community. Then I'm very lucky that I actually also have a very big translocal community that sits at the kind of crossroads of technology and art, which actually includes a few nodes in the UK context, which is Furtherfield Gallery, particularly with Ruth Catlow, Serpentine's Research and Development Lab, and Goethe Institute in London. And from those nodes, we actually then created 2 different think tanks, which also ran as a global community, which were completely offline, private spaces for 48 hours, where we unpacked a lot of these ideas about decentralized technology in the arts. And we were very lucky that those institutions actually allowed us to do that research without having to have public presentations. And that's been going on for like 2 years. And then all of that kind of amalgamated research then actually went into creating like 5 different decentralized autonomous organizations that sit around the world now. So we have one in Hong Kong, one in Johannesburg, one in Berlin, and one in Minsk. And these are also, you know, part of these communities. So you can sort of, just by me sort of explaining very quickly the kind of history of this project, Black Swan, you can sort of maybe understand where I think, and I think this is actually traditional to most activist formations, is that you have connections. And that's really where the community becomes precise, and where you grow. Because also what you're finding out from like one community is something that you can either add on or checker to your own, and vice versa. I think about a little bit just this beautiful line from Tequin's book, The Cybernetic Hypothesis, and it says, we say that autonomy is everyone's to claim, and that the struggle for autonomy must intensify. And I think that's kind of what community is.
Thank you. Soledad, how do you reflect on the same question?
I mean, I think one of the things that, I mean, completely different, because we are not a grassroots organization, we don't come from this activist background, but there is a very much the desire of supporting, first of all, a cultural community, or a cultural community that it comes from like independent organizations based in different places of the world that really engage with their own communities. Then an artistic community that we wanted really to kind of carry on working. And then the fact of it's creating a space of potentiality of producing or carry on producing works that reflect on their own communities. So in that sense, it's really a model where we establish like relationships in different levels, and those relationships in different levels sustain a group of people that relate to each other, establish a conversation between each other, but at the same time establish a conversation with the places and with the people they work with, live with, produce with. So that was the idea, like kind of to create a structure that's porous that can affect, because that's also, I mean, we can sense and we learn from those people, from those communities, from those projects, but also in a way we infiltrate the possibility of the potential of doing things through that practice. And at the same time, there is a return, because those we gather in kind of in a series, I mean, like from time to time, we discuss what we are doing, what we are creating, so there is a kind of a comeback. And then we are aiming to create another community that it's also wider, that we don't know yet, and we are in the process of knowing, we're in the process of establishing this both ways relationship, that it's grounded on the interest for the project we produce, that follows the stage, that follows the conversations, that pass on to us questions. So we are challenging also that zone of comfort of people you know, you have worked with, that have an interest, and try to try to create a conversation with the public in the sense of visitors, audience, internet, and exploring the potential of the digital tools that we are very much, I mean, I was thinking like there's so much potential on that we are still exploring.
Thanks, Soledad. Hearing both of you talk, there's a couple of threads coming through around relationships in particular, and I'm just looking at the questions coming in, and I want to ask a couple now because I think they relate to the conversation we're having, so I'm not going to save these until the end. So Soledad, well, while you're talking, someone's asked how Stage's artist commissioning process identifies communities to work with. Is it artist interest? Is it a community need? Or is it something else? Can you say a little bit about how that's working?
I mean, that was one of the big questions, is like how we identify in a moment that there are so many things clashing and there are so many issues coming up and so many urgencies, how we identify those people and how we reach out to them. So that's the reason also why we decided to go first to our community of independent organizations, to those people we knew we have worked with or we have collaborated, and ask them, what do you think it's more relevant now? Where are the artists that you think that are, or what are the projects that you think that need to have visibility at this stage? And then out of that, we started conversations with many different artists, projects, people. Some of them were in the moment, others were not. And that's kind of, it was really organic, but it started for that community of institutions, so that network of people we have been working with throughout the years. And of course, very much based on the interest. And also that we were really trying to raise awareness of many situations that were not so visible, and that we felt like the COVID as a topic was kind of overlapping and not letting a space to go. So that's what were the criteria. I mean, as I said, it was really organic, and it was very much based on that trust that builds a community of that people that can highlight or can suggest like different people. So it was a from mouth to mouth, no?
Do you think there are any gaps in the way you think about or identify the partners, either institutional or individual? Like after the period of time you've been working on it, reflecting on it, do you think there are any gaps in the way you're thinking about who you work with?
I mean, that's for sure. And that's one of the biggest challenges, no? Also, when you think about an institution, I mean, how you program and how you choose or how you create a exhibition. There is always, I mean, you try to cover as much as possible, but there is like capacity, from human capacity to budget to unknowing. I mean, because you cannot know anything. And sometimes it happens that you open up a conversation and you say, how I didn't know that? And it's like, because I didn't manage to. So then that's one of the things that I think it's, yeah, of course. And that's something we are trying to solve, but it's I mean, I think it's one of those things that happens in all the projects to everyone.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And Penny, I think this is the question that's winning most popular question award, and I feel like lots of ears pricked when you use the phrase radical friendship. I think I'd definitely love to. I think lots of people would love to hear a little bit more about what you meant by that. How, yeah, how are you defining the idea of radical friendship?
Well, the term radical friendship originates from this collection of people that I spoke about earlier, and it's a term that we like hold quite dearly and closely to our collaboration. And really, I mean, it sort of fundamentally is what it says on the tin, but it's very much about having allies and like caring about the pacts that you make with them, about getting the right people in the room, about using potentially, let's call it kind of intersectional feminist strategies of the economics of work and labor, which like might mean, you know, checking in on like a personal and emotional level while you're in the meeting or at the start of the meeting, of like having physical and intuitive bodily experiences, not only typing on your laptop. We often utilize role-playing techniques in order to have a wide, diverse possibility of answers and strategies in our working groups, which of course also have to be performed through a certain vulnerability. And I think when you bring in these human positions and don't see that person as a colleague, but you see them as a friend, I think that these kind of enunciations really potentially have a possibility to like recode the ways in which we collectivify and the ways in which we work together and collaborate. Because I think also what's come very close to me personally is also we often work very consistently to like the neoliberal structures that we're trying to dismantle. And so in a sense, we know these structures don't work for us, but we still recreate them. And I think that it might sound a little bit boring, but like unless we like also revolutionize our working practice with each other and our strategies of participation, like it feels like we're sort of in this strange snow globe effect of practicing. So I would say that, yeah, in order to have a different perspective, like we also need to think differently. And I think that through the lens of Radical Friends, it's certainly given me a methodology to practice with others.
Thank you for that answer. How intertwined or codependent do you think practice and having that approach and philosophy to friendship is with the kind of organizational structure, and that's the decentralized approach that Black Swan has? Like, do they go hand in hand, or do you think radical friendship can exist in more traditional organizational spaces as well?
I mean, in a sense, I would really, really hope it can sit in this more traditional spectrum. I think the real difficulty, or something that I've personally experienced is that quite a lot of institutions and companies, let's say, will frequently sort of culturally wash these strategies, but at the end of the day, there is this hierarchy that has molded certain positions inside those institutions. And when it comes down to the real horizontality of power and decision making, it's very infrequently that we would go to a space of radical friendship. Because at the end of the day, I think that what I have heard in my community is that a lot of traditional models are very interested to keep this on like a kind of fundamental speculative play space of organizing differently. But when it actually fundamentally comes down to real decisions that will really affect, then they're not so keen on taking those tactics. But I also just want to say that I think that changing structures is extremely slow. I don't believe there's ever a thing of an overnight revolution. I do believe in the necropolitical idea that people do have to pass away in order for ideas to crumble. And so I think that I, in my life, will probably not see huge, dramatic, revolutionary changes. But I do know that unless I start in my lifespan, then we will never see them.
Thank you. I feel like we could spend the rest of this session talking about radical friendship and organizational structures, but there's one thing you said that really, I mean, all of it struck me, but that idea about what kind of mode we go to in a crisis or in a challenge or when a difficult decision needs making, and what we lean into, and in organizations who we have to go to as well. And quite often you find certain characteristics in certain places and they're less likely in others. And I feel like there's a totally adjacent thread about power as well, and how radical friendship sits alongside the amount of power different people possess. Sorry, I've monologued there for a minute. I shouldn't do that. I wanted to move on. And I was going to ask a question about, I mean, both of you, and Soledad, to give you some warning, I'm going to come to you first. Both of your projects and ways and kind of working and being are so clearly underpinned by clear social and political agendas. And Penny, you spoke really clearly about kind of Black Swan emerging from the context you found yourself in Berlin, and Soledad, you were talking about the moment of the pandemic and that loss of space. I wanted to ask generally how integral the technologies you work with are to the way you advance your agendas. But actually, I wanted to fold that in with a question from someone, which was, I'm interested in hearing about whether and how the digital has addressed access and issues around inclusion, and what have been the challenges and the way through them. So Soledad, can I come to you first? I think almost specifically with that question, and then that can open up into sort of, I think, the broader way in which you advance the agendas that you're trying to.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question, and that's something we are really trying to cope with. I mean, because there are like different levels of inclusion, no? And we have been working, and we have challenges within the own project that we are trying to address, and that we discuss a lot internally. I mean, first of all, because we are addressing a project that gives or aims to sense different realities, but that it's a very global and very international project, that it's based in an organization that has 2 seats, one in Spain and another one in Vienna, but our working language is English. So for example, that's the first challenge in inclusion. I mean, it's like, how come we are producing most of the materials in English, and how we address that in relation to many of the subjects. Like sometimes, and this is something that it's interesting in terms of one of the things you mentioned at the very beginning, that it's impact, how you measure, I mean, how you reach out to a wider audience. At the same time, you respect and include the people you work with. And that's happened. I mean, that's our daily conversation. And in the beginning, we thought we're going to, I mean, I was really heavily defending the idea of we are going to be inclusive with all the languages. Every single language is going to be addressed. We're going, and nowadays, I mean, we, and this is my personal, but it's something we feel we have failed on that, because there is an issue of translation, there is an issue of budget, there is an issue of many things, but we are still in the process of addressing that correctly because we are not doing it. And I speak blank because to me, I mean, that's something we have to challenge. First of all, that, and then of course it's accessibility towards a certain content. We're trying to work on an inclusive language. That's something also one of the things that, because we want it to be open. We really want to work on that possibility of internet being a digital space, being a public space, and that we have to leave sometimes our zones of comfort. So we try to work on a more accessible language. But again, we have our fights internally because, I mean, it's like how we represent ourselves, how we represent the works in a way that it's read in a context, but also it's read in the other context. And also now we are working on how we integrate things that really admire and appreciate from this conversation, no? Like how we integrate sign language, how we integrate like other ways of other languages. I mean, but it comes to the beginning. We are not able to integrate diversity in the language yet, and that's something we really have to address.
That's one very quick question. I think quite often when organizations present something publicly, the fights have happened, and you talked about we have our fights internally. How do you resolve them?
I mean, we try. It's funny because I've written in capital letters this idea of radical friendship, because now these days we are organizing and we're working on the next year program, and that's what we are trying to do. Also, you have to think that this is, as I said at the beginning, this is a very organic process because it was born out of need, and we really wanted to do something, and we wanted to support, and we wanted to create something new that respond to the moment. So we were producing the site, we were producing the program at the same time we were thinking about it. And still, I think we are in a learning moment of what we are doing, and we are relating to that. So we are in an error trial mood, and I want to address that we always want to work on this scope of vulnerability, of assuming that we are not perfect, and that we want to challenge that.
Thanks, Soledad. And Penny, I'm going to give you two questions in one and then go to try and get through some of the questions we haven't already answered from the Q&A. I think the first is, it's so clear hearing you talk about Black Swan that you're like, you really are quite intertwined with some emergent technologies, democratic voting. How possible would Black Swan be without those? Or could Black Swan only exist in the context of those technologies? And then secondly, do you think some of the approaches that you found yourself taking in terms of organizational structure, how might they be reflected back onto organizations that don't exist on the internet? I leave you those two questions to sort of take in whatever direction you want.
Sure. So first of all, I just maybe want to say a little bit about like how I understand technology. You know, this pen is also a technology to me. This book is also a technology to me in a sense. And really, I think that what is important about like seeing Black Swan through the lens of technology is that a lot of theory and ideas that have come up around decentralization, around autonomy, around opacity or transparency, like these are models that do have code attached to them, but they can also be models that don't. Like, for example, at the moment, Black Swan actually works off the blockchain. And the reason why we decided to do it like that is because huge dynamic changes to the blockchain are being made presently, and we understood that for Web 0.3 they will be changed in our code won't actually be sufficient to be able to be probably active next year. So we actually held off even putting anything on the blockchain. But that doesn't mean that you can't utilize the ideas of like how these things are worked and how they map out. Quadratic voting, a similar thing, like you can actually place it onto the blockchain, or you can also, in a sense, use quadratic voting strategies which utilize more clear dynamics for democracy than a one vote, one choice original voting format. But you could do that on an Excel sheet. You could do that on a piece of paper if you really wanted to. And I think that this is sort of what's important, is about like really thinking about technology as like a new sort of theory in a way. I mean, the digital world has like completely provided us with new ways of living and speaking. And like this license that digitality has given us is like also this kind of license of absence of self-ownership and license to self-sculpt. And that's actually had like a huge effect on our freedom of being. One thing that I sort of pulled out of your question was like, how inclusive is that? Well, in a way, I think this kind of scaled up inclusivity is also maybe a little bit of a problem of the left wing. That I think that we cannot aim to be perfect. I think that in a way, I think also, particularly when we're talking about new modes of organization through technologies like DAOs, like blockchain, like quadratic voting, we can like certainly scare people off or like turn them off for sure. So that's like definitely not part of the inclusivity, but I think it's about demystifying these technologies. And also, as I spoke before, it's really about this next generation. I mean, I actually really love this, like, I guess it was like a questionnaire that came out in 2019 from Tinder, the dating app, where they actually found out that like 75% of Gen Z users, which are digital natives, disclosed that they actually like came out online before in the physical realm. And I think that this is sort of the inclusivity that we're working towards. And where I'm specifically coming from is technology as an intersectional space. And in a way, similar to, I guess, like Legacy Russell, who wrote the Glitch Feminist Manifesto, about like really understanding how bodies that do not have space inside the traditional framing of the art world are actually able to create new communities. And of course, unfortunately, we will miss some people. I feel like I've maybe forgotten the second.
No. I feel like all of these topics open up into sort of 17 different streams that we can't follow all. So we have about 5 or 6 minutes left, and I'm going to be a little bit unfair and ask if, just with these questions, we try and be quite brief. And it's going to be really hard with this one, but I think it's quite important to ask it. Could each of you give us an example of the actual art that's produced through the structures of your organizations? And one thought I've got is, if you've got a link to it or sort of a way someone can find out more, maybe putting that into the chat as well might be quite helpful if people want to go more. Penny, I can still see you on my screen, so I'm going to ask you first and then go to Soledad.
Sure. So for us, the actual art that has been created through the voting system mechanism of distributing resources, so far there was biotechnology of algae making machine that created alternatives for ecological use, and also there was a role-played radio play, which was actually conducted by the whole group of artists participated in it. So they disseminated the resource money. And the other thing is quite an interesting project by Billy Bluesell, who wanted to create a multi-sig, which is like basically a percentage-driven allocation for collective working. So he's a performer, he works with a group of performers, and he wanted to create a legacy contract that formatted different percentages for long-term allocation of funds based on inspiration to actual performance. And we did that for a project that he ran from Folia, which was actually an NFT project just a couple of months ago.
Thank you, and sorry, that was my mum phoning my mobile, which was not on silent. Soledad.
Mums should never be silent.
This is true. Soledad, could you give us an example of a project as well?
I mean, yes, I'm going to share the website because it's everything. It's available, so you can check the links. And as I mentioned before, it's been like mainly. It's mainly, I mean, different formats that mix and that fit into the digital realm easily. So that means video, sound pieces. We have also produced like virtual reality. So we could like kind of screen it through Twitch and trying to use that technology on the purpose of art. But what I would like to take advantage of this moment is like to get to one of the questions that was in the chat about the language and how relevant languages were when you are talking about different communities that are not, I mean, Western, or they are not in the European or Anglo-Saxon context. I totally agree. And in the case of the artworks, I mean, we always, I mean, even though I have said it's a challenge, I mean, it's a challenge for some of the materials we produce or for the reading of the text. The artworks are always, the languages are always respected. And if the artist is not able to host or hold the conversation in English, then it happens in Spanish, it happens in the language that it's required in order to give that space of possibility, that for sure. I mean, because that would be totally unfair and would reduce a lot in the possibilities. But still, and I reiterate what I said before, we have a long way to go.
Thank you, Soledad. We've got 1 minute left before I need to hand over to Jess. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions for Penny. Penny, there's one from Judith Fieldhouse, which I don't think we've got time for, but if you're up for answering it in the chat, that would be really kind. But a question for you, I'm just going to go by the votes. This is the last question. Has Black Swan noticed or become aware of how your working methods are affecting and changing how larger institutions make decisions and operate internally?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can say there is an interest from these larger institutions. We will actually do a piece that's in situ in Kunstwerke institution in September in Berlin, and also the Van Abi in the Netherlands, who've both actually asked for us to create role-played kind of cosmologies of how these can be implemented. And the other thing is that we're often asked into advice on how DAO structures, or how quadratic voting, or how do you still enable professionalization, but also have horizontal power structures active in your institution. So I would say that there has been like a really positive interest in these institutions, that particularly asking for advice and space to be able to talk through these components, which is really positive.
Thank you. I feel like I might join the list of people coming to ask you for advice. Okay, I just want to thank both of you on behalf of everyone here, and also thank everyone who's been listening and asking the questions you've been asking. It's made it a joy to chair because the Q&A has just been so rich. I'm really mindful, I'll just say one last thing and then hand over to Jess, that this panel was called Is the Future of Public Art Online? And when Lily and Elizabeth first emailed me, I was like, I just don't think we can answer that question. And just to say, I think we've thought of it as a mountain that's not possible to get to the top of, but we can kind of try a few different routes around it. And I feel listening to both of you that we've sort of done that and hopefully shone a little bit of light on the question, whilst also acknowledging that it's a provocation as much as it is a question that can ever be answered with a yes or a no. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jess.
Thanks so much, Sid and Soledad and Penny. That was really fantastic, incredibly useful, and a really fascinating discussion, which I'm sure will develop rapidly over, well, the coming year, not just years. But yeah, there was so much in there. I was particularly interested in the idea of the digital realm as a site of activism, and the new possibilities it presents to create a democratic process. Come on, the revolution, that's what I say. Thanks so much to our audience. You've been absolutely brilliant. I loved your questions. And please do share with us any further feedback that you might have. You'll see in the Slido bar a questionnaire, which would be really great to get your feedback before you leave. And we'll be uploading a recording of today's event on the Up Project's YouTube channel, which will include captions and a BSL interpreter. Please do sign up for our mailing list for more information about Up Project's programme and future plans for the Public Art Network. And I have to thank the Art Fund and the Arts Council for funding this series of events, and also the very brilliant Teresa Byrne from Public Art Network, as well as Emma Underhill and Elizabeth Delpret from Up Projects for putting together such a fantastic programme. It's been so good working with you all. And lastly, I want to thank Sam Tucker, our BSL sign interpreter, who's done an amazing job, and we understand how hard it is. And Katie Ryder, who provided closed captions. Chloe Hodge, who's done a great job of writing up the case studies, and the brilliant team at the project. I think that's an ambulance in Berlin, maybe. And also Lily Hager, Jack Newbury, and Tamsin Arrowsmith Brown, who all work at Up Projects and have worked really hard behind the scenes to make this whole programme happen. Thanks so much. Over and out.